If you had asked me 5 years ago what I was building, I might have given you some lofty answer. Something about artificial intelligence, real-time predictive modeling, or maybe even a revolution in fintech. But deep down, I was building something far more personal. I was building control. It started with a blank screen, an old ThinkPad on a wobbly desk inside a co-working space off Pearl Street in Boulder, Colorado. I had no funding, no titles, no staff, just a stubborn belief that if I could write the code no one else could crack, I'd write myself into a future no one could take away. Back then, I didn't care about suits or scaling. I cared about elegance, integrity, a system that could learn, adapt, and defend itself. Something no one could tamper with, at least not without consequences. By year 2, I had my first version of the autonomous financial intelligence engine up and running. A beast of an algorithm that could analyze market behaviors in real time and adjust entire portfolios within microseconds. No one else had anything like it. Not even close. That's when Stratus Core Technologies came knocking. A venture-backed firm in Austin looking for something disruptive. They offered me funding, a leadership role, and a team of 10 engineers. And like any bootstrap founder hungry for traction, I said yes. I moved to Texas, traded my beat-up Subaru for a Tesla, traded late-night ramen for sushi dinners with investors. But I never traded my code. That engine, my engine, stayed locked inside a private server, one only I had access to. Not because I didn't trust the company. I didn't trust people. Because here's the thing they don't teach you at Stanford or in startup incubators. It's never about the tech. It's about the people who want to own it. The ones who smile to your face while planning to replace you behind your back. And the smarter you are, the earlier you realize it's not enough to build something brilliant. You have to protect it. From everyone. Even from your own board. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays used to be strategy days, when I'd meet with the core dev team in the glass conference room overlooking the Colorado River, sip cold brew from a local roaster, and map out the future like we actually owned it. That Tuesday started no differently. Whiteboards filled with arrows and acronyms, buzz in the air about expanding to Asia Pacific. But at 3:17 p.m., my calendar pinged. Private, executive check-in. The invite came from Peter Langston, our CFO. And when a CFO schedules a meeting with no agenda, you already know the agenda. I walked in and saw them waiting, Peter, the CEO, Matt Carlson, and a third guy I didn't recognize right away. Slick suit, fake grin. The kind of guy who calls himself a visionary on LinkedIn. Matt stood first, all corporate charm. Ethan, thanks for joining us. Please have a seat. I sat, said nothing, waited. Peter cleared his throat. There's no easy way to say this, he began, which is always the way cowards start hard conversations. As we move into the next phase of growth post-Series C, we've decided to bring in someone with more operational experience. I didn't flinch, just stared. You're replacing me. Matt jumped in. You've done an amazing job. Ethan, really, this company wouldn't exist without your early work. But we need someone who's scaled past $100 million. Who's worked with institutional investors, IPO strategy. I looked at the third man again. That's when I remembered Bryce Delaney, former VP of product at a competitor that went belly up 2 years ago. He nodded at me like we were old friends. And then Peter, as if reading from a script, slid a folder across the table. This is a severance package. Very generous. I think you'll find. You'll keep your equity, of course, vesting accelerated. We hope this can be a smooth transition. Smooth. As if 5 years of 70-hour weeks, missed birthdays, a wrecked relationship, and an ulcer were just a stepping stone. I picked up the folder, opened it, and looked at the signature line. My name, printed in legal black. Then I looked up at them. You do realize the engine still runs on my private key, I said calmly. Peter blinked. Of course. But you'll hand that over as part of the offboarding. Standard procedure. I smiled, just a little, and in that moment, I decided, no, it ends differently. They thought I was just another coder with a big ego. They didn't realize I was also a systems architect who never forgot the most important rule in tech. If you build the mainframe, you always build a backdoor. I didn't storm out. That's not my style. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and nodded once, like a man excusing himself from a meeting that no longer concerned him. I shook Peter's hand, briefly, like a gesture made out of formality, not respect. And when Bryce reached out to do the same, I walked right past him. I didn't look back at the glass office I designed myself, or the engineering pod that bore my fingerprints in every corner. I just walked down the corridor in silence, each step echoing a little louder than the last. By the time the elevator doors closed, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was calculating. You see, I prepared for this. Not out of paranoia, but out of pattern recognition. In this industry, betrayal isn't a risk. It's a guarantee. And somewhere along year 3, when I realized how dependent the system was becoming on my core algorithms, I did what any responsible creator would do. I wrote a failsafe. It wasn't flashy. No red countdowns. No cinematic warnings. Just a line of code buried inside the scheduler. So deep and so subtle that even the best security analyst wouldn't think to question it. It checked for one thing, and one thing only: whether an authentication attempt was made using a non-authorized admin credential. Specifically, anyone but me. If triggered, it would initiate a cascading wipe. Not instantly. That would be too obvious. No, it would start slow. First, it would corrupt redundant logs, then rotate audit trails until the system couldn't trace its own steps. Then it would begin rewriting key components of the decision matrix with meaningless data, elegant nonsense that looked correct, but under the surface was rot. And then finally, it would erase the engine. I call it echo kill, not out of malice, but as a reminder, you don't steal fire from the man who invented it and expect not to get burned. Back in my Denver apartment that night, I opened my laptop and checked the failsafe's heartbeat, a quiet ping once every 6 hours, confirming no intrusion. Still green. I closed the lid, made a drink, and stared out the window. Let them get comfortable. Let them believe they've taken the throne. Because what they don't know, what they'll never understand, is that I didn't build a product. I built a living, breathing system, and it knows who its creator is. It came 2 nights later. I was up late, half listening to Miles Davis and tweaking some side project code, while my phone buzzed softly on the kitchen counter. Just one alert. No sound, just a vibration, the kind I programmed myself, distinct from every other notification. I walked over, picked it up, and looked at the screen. Unauthorized access detected. ID, root_Bryce_Delaney. There it was. The moment they crossed the line. The moment they tried to become me. The silence in my apartment suddenly felt different. Heavier. Like the calm right before thunder. I didn't move. Didn't speak. I just watched the timestamp blink on the screen and felt something deep in my chest shift. Not anger. Not even satisfaction. Something colder. Calculated. Finished. Echo Kill had been activated. Somewhere in a high-rise tower in downtown Austin, a man named Bryce Delaney had just entered the system he thought he controlled. And the system had recognized a stranger. Not just unauthorized, unworthy. By now, the logs were already fracturing. The data lakes were beginning to tilt. 1,000 small processes, each meaningless on their own, had begun to collapse in sequence. Like snow melting beneath a glacier, slow at first, then catastrophic. And the best part? They would notice. Not at first. Tomorrow, someone on the DevOps team would flag a checksum error in a non-critical module. Harmless. They'd patch it. Then a few days later, their AI wouldn't respond correctly to a simulated volatility spike. It would recommend liquidation during a bull run. They'd think it was a bug, maybe a regression error. By the time they realized what was happening, really happening, it would be too late. Because what Echo Kill does best isn't destruction. It erodes trust. It turns the elegant into the unstable, the genius into the unreliable. It hollows out your cathedral from the inside while you're still standing in it, lighting candles and giving tours. And when it finally crashes, when the decisions start costing real money, when investor confidence drops, when clients begin leaving because your system doesn't feel right anymore, they'll look for someone to blame. And that someone won't be there. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even get off the couch. I just let Miles Davis play a little longer. Because revenge isn't a scream. It's a whisper. And the most dangerous man in the room is always the one who doesn't have to raise his voice. It was a Tuesday again. Exactly 1 week since they'd handed me the severance folder and shown me the door. Funny how life likes symmetry. I was at a quiet cafe near Cheeseman Park, laptop open, headphones in, reviewing data for a new project I'd started. Something clean, something mine. No politics, no boardrooms. And that's when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew the area code. Austin. I stared at it for a moment, sipping my black coffee. Then I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Same number. Persistent. This time, I picked up curiosity, not kindness. Ethan. The voice came through, breathless and brittle. It's Peter. I didn't say anything. Let him sit in the silence he never used to tolerate. We need your help, he said finally. Of course you do. We're experiencing a system anomaly. Multiple, actually. The AI's been making erratic predictions. Trade outputs don't match risk parameters, and no one can trace the source. We've pulled in outside consultants, but nothing makes sense. It's like the engine is thinking in riddles. Still, I said nothing. Then he added, almost whispering, is there any chance this is related to the handover process? Something you might have forgotten to transfer. Forgotten? I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I kept my voice even. I followed every step outlined in the offboarding packet you handed me. You insisted on a clean break, remember? He was quiet. And for the first time since I'd met him, Peter Langston sounded small. Not calculating. Not in control. Just lost. Then he said the line I'd been waiting for. Bryce is out. The board removed him this morning. Matt's under fire, too. We didn't understand what we had until it started slipping through our fingers. I could hear the panic swelling under his tone. The sound of a man trying to put out a fire with paperwork. I can offer you full system control again, he said quickly. We'll reissue your title, double your previous comp package. You name it, it's yours. Now I did laugh. Quietly. Peter, I said slowly, you don't get it. I don't want your title. I designed the crown, and you tried to give it to a fool. I could feel him flinch on the other end of the line. I could fix it. I added, but I won't. Silence. Then, finally, a broken voice. Why? I stood, leaving a 20 on the table, slipping my laptop into my bag. Because some systems, I said, walking out into the crisp Colorado air, aren't built to be fixed. They're built to remember. An Echo Kill would remember. Not out of revenge, but because it was loyal, not to a company, but to its creator. The truth is, walking away wasn't the hard part. Staying away, that's what tested me. Every instinct in me, the engineer, the builder, the fixer, screamed to go back, to clean up the mess, to restore what I had created before they tried to corrupt it. But I knew better. You can't resurrect something that was born out of compromise and expect it to become pure again. So instead, I let it die. Straight as Core Technologies would spend months trying to trace the phantom bugs, burning cash on cybersecurity firms and forensic audits. They'd blame everything from legacy code to sabotage. Whispers of lawsuits would swirl. Investors would pull out. The brand would become radioactive. And I disappeared. No interviews. No press statements. Just silence. I moved north, rented a quiet cabin outside of Fort Collins. Not too remote, but far enough that the air smelled like pine instead of power. I traded my sleek tech wardrobe for flannel and jeans, dusted off my old notebooks, and began again. But this time, I wasn't chasing disruption. I was chasing resilience. I started coding at sunrise. Not for a market, not for a pitch deck, just for clarity. I built a small modular AI framework, something open source, deliberately transparent. No proprietary locks. No black box dependencies. Just clean, simple architecture, elegant in its honesty. And people noticed. Not investors, not journalists, but developers, freelancers, medical researchers in rural clinics, nonprofits working on climate data. They started using my code, not to make billions, but to solve problems, real problems. And slowly, something unexpected happened. They began reaching out. Not with term sheets, but with thank you notes, emails, even handwritten letters. One came from a woman in Montana who used my framework to build a wildfire prediction model that saved her entire county during a dry lightning outbreak. Another came from a college student in Kenya who translated the code into Swahili so her classmates could learn machine learning without needing Western licenses. I hadn't just rebuilt a system. I'd rebuilt trust. And in doing so, I rebuilt myself. Because somewhere in the rubble of what Straightest Core became, in the ashes of betrayal and lost years, I found something worth more than any IPO or retention bonus. I found peace and the quiet, steady knowledge that when you build something true, it lives far beyond your name. It was late spring when the email arrived. Subject line, keynote invitation, Future Tech Global Conference, San Francisco. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I hadn't been on a public stage in nearly 2 years. My name had quietly faded from headlines, replaced by younger, louder voices. But there was a personal note from the conference chair asking if I'd speak on a panel about ethical AI systems in volatile environments. I almost declined, but something about the tone of the message, humble, sincere, made me pause. They weren't asking for TED Talk. They wanted a perspective forged in fire. They wanted truth. So I said yes. And 2 months later, I found myself stepping onto a stage in a sleek auditorium. The lights warm, the silence anticipatory. The panel was moderated by a professor from MIT. Seated beside me was a robotics expert from Tokyo, a systems biologist from Toronto, and at the far end of the table, half hidden behind a folded nameplate, Peter Langston. I hadn't seen him since that phone call in Denver. He looked older, thinner. The sharp edges of confidence had dulled. His smile, when he saw me, was hesitant, part guilt, part curiosity. I gave him nothing back, just a nod. The conversation started light. Frameworks, future models, open source advantages. I kept my answers measured, professional. But then the moderator turned to me directly. Ethan, she said, your open modular framework is being used in over 40 countries now, in environmental science, public health, even education. But you were once part of a very different system. What changed? I paused. The room leaned forward, and then I spoke. I used to believe the most important thing in tech was innovation, building something no one else had seen before. But I was wrong. The most important thing is integrity. Because when you build something that affects lives, communities, entire ecosystems, you don't just owe it functionality. You owe it morality. I glanced down the panel. You can't scale trust. You have to earn it, line by line, choice by choice. And if you hand your creation to people who treat it like a trophy or a weapon, don't be surprised when it turns on them. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged. Peter didn't look at me. He stared at the table, his fingers twitching slightly. Afterward, as people gathered around the stage, he approached me. Slowly. I deserve that, he said quietly. I looked at him, not with anger, just clarity. No, I replied. You deserved a second chance. You used it to replace the only person who could have saved you. He nodded, lips tightening. There was nothing left to say. I turned, walked out into the San Francisco sun, and didn't look back. Because some stories don't end with applause. Some stories end with a man walking away. Not in defeat, not in revenge, but in freedom. I never planned on becoming a mentor. Mentorship always felt like something reserved for tenured professors or LinkedIn influencers, not guys who coded out of cabins and turned down 7-figure redemption packages. But then again, most of what mattered in my life never followed a plan. It just found me. It started with one email. A computer science grad student from Arizona State had stumbled across my open source framework and used it to build a decentralized healthcare tool for migrant clinics. Her email wasn't asking for a job, a reference, or funding. She just wanted to say thank you. I replied, told her what I liked about her approach and where the code could be hardened. She wrote back. Then she asked if I'd be willing to look at another project. I said sure. 1 became 5. 5 became 20. Before long, I found myself hosting weekend Zoom calls from the deck of my cabin, talking to students, veterans, solo developers from all over the world. No sponsors, no branding, just pure exchange of ideas. People building not to dominate the market, but to fix something broken around them. And every time one of them launched something meaningful, a tool for blind students, a privacy-first search model, a wildfire detector made with parts from a drone kit, They gave credit not to me, but to the code itself, to the idea. I realized then, this was my legacy, not the system I had built for Stratus Core, not the sabotage, the scandal, or even the speech that went viral. But these people, these makers, these rebels in hoodies and headphones who were taking the best of what I'd created and making it better and honest. One afternoon, a young man from North Carolina asked me, "Do you ever miss the power? The company? The spotlight?" I thought about it. The private jet rides, the catered retreats, the way rooms used to pause when I entered. And I smiled. No, I said, because back then, everything I built had someone else's name on the check. Now, everything they build has no name on it at all, just purpose. He nodded, quietly understanding. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and looked up at the sky. Legacy isn't what you leave behind when you're gone. It's what people carry forward while you're still here, quietly, diligently, without fanfare. And that was more than enough. It came in a matte black envelope. No return address. No logo. Just my name, handwritten in clean block letters. It was waiting in my mailbox one foggy morning in early autumn, tucked between a farm equipment catalog and a postcard from one of my mints in Brazil. I almost threw it out, but curiosity, that ancient, familiar pull, made me slice it open. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, folded once. Printed in precise, serif font. Mr. Ethan Vaughn, we would like to discuss a matter of significant importance regarding the future of decentralized intelligence systems. A car will be waiting outside your residence tomorrow at 9 a.m. Should you choose to decline, no response is necessary. Dominion Core Group. I stared at the name. Dominion Core. They weren't a startup. They weren't even public. Dominion was the kind of global consortium that quietly funded quantum computing research in Sweden, bought out failed nuclear initiatives in Eastern Europe, and once tried to acquire NASA's satellite telemetry team, anonymously. They didn't ask people to work for them. They selected people. The next morning, I waited, not because I intended to accept, but because I needed to see who would show up. At exactly 9 o'clock, a black electric SUV pulled up, sleek and silent, like a whisper dressed in chrome. The driver, a woman in a dark suit with military posture, nodded once and opened the door. I stepped in. The meeting took place in a minimalist glass office overlooking a lake somewhere near Boulder. I didn't ask where. The man across from me introduced himself as Cameron Hart, Chief Strategic Officer. He didn't waste time. "We believe your framework," he said, "has the capacity to become the nervous system of a new global network. Self-regulating, incorruptible, immune to politicization. You've solved the problems our teams have spent a decade chasing." He slid a tablet across the table. On it an offer. Equity stake. Creative control. A blank check. He leaned forward. "We don't want to own what you've built, Ethan. We want to build with you. No interference. No marketing buzzwords. Just resources. Just reach." I looked him in the eyes. "You don't want to own it," I said. "You just want to scale it faster than anyone else. To make sure no one else beats you to it." He didn't deny it. Just smiled. "You can either be the architect of the future or its cautionary tale." I stood up, and I told him the same thing I'd told Peter Langston years before. I didn't build this to win. I built it so people wouldn't lose. He rose, his smile fading. "You'll walk away from this?" I nodded. "Some things," I said, "aren't for sale. Not even to the highest bidder." The silence between us crackled, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Not disappointment, not anger. Respect. By the time I stepped back into the Colorado wind, I knew I'd done the right thing. Because power is seductive. Influence is intoxicating. But freedom is the only currency I'll never trade. It was early winter when I knew the story was coming to a close. Not my life. No, I was still very much alive. Healthier than I'd been in years. Hiking the foothills each morning, coding by the fireplace each night, sharing knowledge without strings attached. But I could feel it. The end of the chapter that began in a rented co-working space in Boulder and passed through betrayal, silence, and rebirth. One morning, while snow dusted the evergreens behind my cabin, I sat at my desk and opened a fresh document. No IDE, no GitHub, just a blinking cursor and an idea I'd avoided for years. What would I leave behind if I were gone tomorrow? I didn't write a memoir. I didn't craft some grand narrative to impress historians or future entrepreneurs. I wrote a letter, a short one, addressed to whoever would need it most. It read, "You'll be tempted someday to trade clarity for scale, to swap your name for a logo, to let someone else tell the world what you're worth. Don't. The code is not the product. You are. And if they take the system, the office, the title, let them. Just never let them take your line. That one line of code only you would write. The one no one else would have thought of. The one that makes it yours. Leave that, and someone someday will find it, and they'll know you were here." I printed it, folded it, taped it inside the cover of a weathered notebook, the same one I'd used when I first sketched out the architecture of the engine, back before funding, before betrayal, before anyone knew my name. Then I placed that notebook in a fireproof lockbox, along with a USB drive containing the full clean build of my final open source framework, annotated, documented, and licensed to everyone or no one. I didn't do it because I thought the world would need saving. I did it because one person might need permission. Permission to say no. Permission to start over. Permission to believe that what you build doesn't have to serve the loudest voice in the room, just the truest. I stepped outside, letting the cold mountain air fill my lungs. Birdsong, wind through pines, silence, not as absence, but as peace. And in that moment, I knew they would tell their stories. They would write their headlines. But mine? Mine would be found quietly in the margins of someone else's beginning. And that would be enough. If this story spoke to you, even in a quiet way, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment and tell us what your final line would be. What is the one thing you'd never let them take? If this story gave you something to think about, hit like. And if you're building something, even just yourself, subscribe. Because here, we don't just chase success. We chase truth. See you in the next story.